Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Hey everybody, hope you're doing okay out there. On today's episode, we're going to start off with some phone calls. First from Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and then from Anthony Boyd of the Casting Shadows podcast. That's going to help us kind of put a little ending note on RPG a day for 2022, and then after that, I want to talk a little bit about a new game I've started DMing and a kind of return to basics when it comes to live play and theater of the mind. So, but first, let's get to the calls.
Hey, BJ, Jason here, listening to RPG Day, Week 5. Interesting both of us mentioned hankering. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to reach out to those guys and to see what they think about taking part in something like this. As far as doing it on Cerebrivore, I think that's an interesting idea, doing a panel discussion. I don't know that I definitely would not do Cerebrivore in my show, simply because I don't want to inundate people. I already know people in the community that tune out in August and turn off their social feeds because they get overwhelmed with too much. And I don't want to encourage, that to be even worse. But maybe just on our own podcast, pointing people towards Cerebrivore, and maybe we do 2 discussions, on the off weeks of Cerebrivore. We have panel discussion for 2 weeks worth of questions or something, or at least some of the questions, and go back and forth. I think that's an interesting idea, and I think that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Jason, we should definitely talk about that more, and maybe talk with Carl and Joe and some of the other people who come in and out of the Cerebrivore panel about maybe doing that. I like that idea. Maybe not just do it entirely, just taking a couple of the prompts so that it doesn't duplicate what we do on our own shows, also doesn't compete with or overtake, and also so we're just not overwhelming our shared audience with too much content in too short of a period of time. But yeah, let's continue to talk about doing that, and maybe next August we can get who knows, maybe Anthony will give us a sneak peek sometime in June or July as to what the prompts are going to be, so we can get those things recorded. Maybe Anthony would join us. Who knows? A lot of possibilities there. So we'll continue that conversation behind the scenes, and maybe this time next year we'll have something interesting to offer the audience.
Hey BJ, congratulations! You made it all the way through RPG A Day 2022, and with very interesting posts too. Kind of like this one where Carl calls in and we get, the GM's perspective on the recap from your previous episode. I don't know what it is, but there's something that's really engaging about a group of players having a post-game discussion. It's a big feature of play for me, recorded or not recorded. I think it's a really important part of it, and I can remember many, many nights where the post-game discussion would sometimes run as long or even longer than the game discussion, because there's so much stuff going on and people were so invested in what they were doing. And it sounds like that's exactly the mood that's going on with this Hyperborea campaign. So it's really cool to get an insight into it. As for what to do about the 10th anniversary, I'm not going to comment a lot until this day has spread, or that particular day has spread around the world, and we have a chance to look at all of the feedback, searching through the hashtags on all the different social media platforms to see what people think and what people suggest. And then there'll be some kind of post-mortem of 2022 like we do in most other years. As for getting superstars of tabletop role-playing involved, I'm of 2 minds. I think the extended reach that those personalities have into people who play the game that superstar represents is a very long reach. It goes beyond the people who regularly communicate online about role-playing games. It goes to the people who just play and who will tune in to watch some famous person play because that's interesting. But that's about the extent of their interest. So they can reach into those areas, and I think that's really valuable. The flip side, the other side of my mind is, if these superstars are really invested in tabletop role-playing games, you kind of have to wonder why they're not participating. Not in a negative way, I mean in a serious way. What is it that they perceive about it that makes them not want to do it? Either way, another fun episode, and I look forward to whatever comes next. I also am looking forward to hearing more about the Temple of Elemental Evil campaigns. Take care.
Hey, Anthony. Yeah, I think I've heard, I can't remember who said this. It's one of the, speaking of the superstars of content creators, I believe it was Matt Colville that in one of his videos talking about, he's of the opinion that Dungeons and Dragons anyway, and I think probably by extension most of the long-standing role-playing games that emerged in the 70s and 80s and the current versions of those games, at least the ones that have gone through edition changes, those games are not storytelling games. They are games that yield a story after the fact. And it's exactly those conversations that happen after the game or the next day or before you start the conversation about last week's game as you're getting ready to start today's game. That's where the story comes from. The game is not meant to generate a story. The story is the story we tell about what happened after we've played the game. And that's very different than some of the more new school games that are specifically designed to generate stories as a function of the game mechanics and the game procedures. But the classic role-playing games are not storytelling games. They are games that we naturally get together with our friends and tell a story about. But that's the same way as getting together at a reunion with the guys you played football or baseball or basketball with and recounting the stories of the big game or the championship game or things like that. We play the game to play the game, and then stories about what happened during the game are an added effect and maybe a very important part, and maybe what makes them so endearing and what causes them to endure as a hobby that people come back to time and time again. That's an interesting point you make about those. Sometimes you talk as long after the game as it took to play the game, as you construct the narrative of what we just experienced together, which is a very, very much a human thing to do, regardless of whether you just experienced a harrowing experience or an exciting experience or a game or any other kind of shared experience. The story of that comes after the fact once we compare our details and give our thoughts and our feelings and our recollections. So. As far as the superstars, is it just not on their radar? Those of us who might have a little bit of a connection to someone higher up in the food chain, so to speak, might say, hey, why don't you consider doing this next year, and we'll see. But yeah, I think that is a good question. Why have other people not picked up on it? It's certainly out there for everybody to find between the hashtags and the buzz about it. So, but we'll see what we can do about growing it next year, I guess. And as for the Temple of Elemental Evil games, you're in luck. I've got my old school essentials version of the game. We have finished T1, the Village of Hamlet, and I've got this Friday night the session which should wrap up that section of the Village of Hamlet for my 5e game, and that'll allow me to do a comparison of their exploits in the dungeons beneath the moat house in both editions of the game. And then from there we'll move on to the transition for between, I guess, I don't know if they ever officially called it T2, because, collectively Temple of Elemental Evil is T1 to T3. It's got T1 Village of Hamlet, and then it's got this interlude, and then it's got T3, which is the Temple of Elemental Evil itself. But I don't know if that middle section was ever officially called T2 or not. Anyway, but that's where we're headed. So stay tuned, and I should have a recap on that coming up fairly soon once we finish our 5e game this week. Briefly, before we get to the main topic, I haven't really talked much about it. It's other Anchor podcasters have talked about the Anchor apocalypse. And what has happened is they have removed and changed some of our functionality of the Anchor app. I think the vast majority of us who use Anchor just record on our phones through the app. And so it's got some functions for editing down segments and arranging segments and inserting sound effects and music and things like that. But the big thing it has is through the Anchor app, you're able to have up until now been able to keep a list of your favorite podcasts. And so if you want to leave a message for a podcaster within the app, you click over and you can leave them a message. And within your, menu that automatically comes up when you open the app, it lets you know if someone has left a voice message for you. Well, they've removed the favorites list and they removed the notifications. So I can still insert a call if it's in my library where someone has left me a call from the app, but I don't have any way of knowing it's there unless I just habitually go look for them when I sit down to record an episode. So, and sometimes it's nice to listen to them as they come in because I can thinking about how to make responses or over the course of 2 or 3 days, what people have called in about. If there's a theme, that helps me sort of shape how I'm going to do the next episode. So that's become a little harder now. Of course, I do get email notifications, but, email notifications, I get enough email as it is to have, that's one of the things that's going to stack up in the inbox for email. So it's not nearly as functional. The other thing is I don't know how many listeners who aren't podcasters I have that would be using the Anchor app to listen, because I think part of the reason they're not supporting so much of the Anchor app as they used to is because it's owned by Spotify, and they would just rather use their Spotify podcast platform. And maybe we're fewer in number, those of us that use the app for all its functions. Anyway, so now you've got to go to the website in a web browser and click on leave a message there. So that's a little more difficult, particularly to do from a smartphone. There's been mixed results from what I understand from other podcasters about the audio quality, particularly if you're not using a headphone set. Of course, if you do it from a computer, you're probably okay. I just realized I stumbled over my words there. It's probably good quality if you're using headphones and a microphone when you do it from your smartphone. But if you're just talking, on a speakerphone using a web browser on your phone, the quality may not be as good. Anyway, moving forward, you will be able to, one way or the other, leave voice messages directly from a web browser on the web page for the podcast, and you can always record a voice message on your phone and email it to me at arcane.alienist@gmail.com, and I will import it into Anchor and be able to do it that way. So a little aggravating on the part of trying to put together these podcasts. One of the things Anchor is really good is for people who just do this as a hobby and kind of a garage band, do it yourself, kind of aesthetic. It's making it a little harder, but I think we're going to survive. Anyway, that's kind of it for the Anchor apocalypse. On to today's topic. Briefly, I just wanted to talk about, I had mentioned when RPG A Day month started during that first week, what a lot of the prompts got me to talking about was this new game I'm going to play for a local group of their high school students. I think there's maybe a couple of people who are like college freshmen. And this is my first time in 2 or 3 years DMing live at a table. Everything else has been virtual because of the pandemic. So this was a new game with people, a couple of them I know, but nobody I've ever played with before. And so not only is it the first live, but I've also chosen to just do theater of the mind. No maps, no minis, no tokens, no scatter terrain, nothing. We're just going to do theater of the mind. The first session was a little rough because we were expecting about 5 to 6 people and we got 10. And none of them had characters made. And I have worked talked new players before, groups of new players before, about quickly generating 5th edition first level characters, and it goes very fast. But it goes very fast when you got 3 or 4 people. It gets a lot harder when you have that many people making characters, particularly if they're going to make a fighter or a rogue. It goes really quick. But if they're making characters that have to select spells, that becomes a lot more of a challenging thing. And if you just got a couple people doing it, it's not a problem. But anyway, so we spent our first session almost the entire time making characters, and I was thinking, gosh, how am I going to run a game for this many people? Well, it turns out that one of the people there, she had just come just to see what it was about. She made a character just to see what it was like, but really wasn't going to play. So, she's not coming back. And then her boyfriend was there, and he's not going to come back because he didn't even make a character. He was just hanging out with her. My son saw that there were that many people there, and he was like, I'm calling Mom and going home. I can play D&D at home anytime I want. This is too many people. So I think we got ourselves down to 4 regulars and maybe 2 kids who will come every now and then when they were able to, depending on what their family's doing that weekend. And I think one of them has a part-time job. So that's a much more manageable group. So we got to play just an initial encounter where goblins ambush them. It's the opening encounter to the Lost Mines of Phandelver. And let everybody see a little bit about what rolling the dice is like and making attacks. And then we had to stop. So this weekend, I actually got to do a proper full session, and when we got nearly to the end of the first part of the Lost Mines of Phandelver, as the now much smaller party breaks off from the main group, we say, and follows these goblins into the woods back to their hideout to discover what was going on. And it went really well, and it was very refreshing to do theater of the mind. To just and the starter sets for 5th edition encourage you to do. They don't use the term theater of the mind, but both the Lost Mines of Phandelver and the new one, Dragon of Stormwrack Isle, that just came out in June. Both of those, they're designed for new dungeon masters, but both of them explain that the maps and the images in the book are more for the dungeon master, so you can keep track of what's going on. They're not really for the players. And of course, if you show the player, you can't just show them a section of the map the way it's printed in the book. You don't want to show them the whole map because it tips away some of the mystery and the surprises. But it's interesting to me that the core introductory routes for 5th edition D&D encourage more theater of the mind play. And the DM has a sense of a scaled map just so he can keep track of how far people move and ranges of ranged attacks and spells. And it was really easy to wing it when I did that. Of course, I'm a pretty experienced DM. So, but I really enjoyed doing theater of the mind that way. And I didn't have to lug around a box full of minis and worry about, do I have the right minis to match the monsters or the right, pieces of terrain to set up a room to show where a table or a barrel or a crate of, something is sitting in the corner. We just describe it and let people's imagination fill it in. And it went really well. I think also having new players who don't expect the miniatures and the terrain, they just naturally was, I'm gonna have to picture this in my head. Okay, and people asked me for clarifications or if I could tell that people were maybe had not understood what I was describing. I said, wait a minute, back up. Let me explain this again. Very smooth, very fast. The fights went quick. Everybody's turns went quick. So it was really nice, and it got me thinking of the contrast between using a virtual tabletop online. And I'll come back to that in a second, but I want to describe a little more about how the game went. The main thing I noticed with these being new players, and I think a couple of them, even though they haven't played, they've been watching Critical Role and other live plays on YouTube, was me kind of trying to encourage them. Don't roll a die until I ask you to. Don't say, can I roll perception to see this? Just say, can I see this? Can I look for this? Can I search around for this? Do I know anything about that? And then I will tell you, whether you need to roll or not, or whether it's just something, like somebody got caught up in a snare and they were dangling, upside down from a tree, weren't hurt. And everybody was trying to figure out how to combine skill rolls to get them out of the tree. And I'm like, well, you could just, go cut the other end of the rope and slowly lower them down. There's no there's no skill challenge involved here. No need to bring in acrobatics or anything like that. We'll just cut the rope and just slowly lower him down, and he won't get hurt. So that was a lot of fun. So I think I'm going to enjoy these new players learning the conventions of playing the game and how you communicate back and forth with the DM and then discuss stuff. And doing it in Theater of the Mind really, I think, promotes a lot of communication. As to whether that would change the way I run things online, I think I do want to think about it. I think I would like to try it. I just know that I don't think I can completely abandon digital tools online. I've got some players that I play with that would probably be fine. And then I've got others who maybe sometimes need a little more visual. The thing is, when you're sitting at a table in a room with people around a table, they see you. They see you, at least from the waist up, if you're sitting at a table. And if you want to stand up, you can. You gesticulate, you point, you wave your arms, you move your hands to help convey sense of space and direction. And I can say, well, they're how far away? They're like the distance from where I'm sitting over to that door over there. That's how far it is. Or the room is, and just the way you kind of hold your hands up, hold your hands down, hold them out to the side, point. Like I said, there's lots of gestures you can use in a room, and utilizing the space of a room as reference points to help people understand in 3 dimensions, what's going on. I don't know if you can do that playing through Zoom or Discord chat or something like that, because people just kind of see your face. And I guess you could back up and do it, but even if you back up and wave your hands, you still don't get that 3-dimensional space where everybody can look around, they can look behind you, they can look to what you're pointing to over at the side. I just don't know that you can do that the way you do it live in a room. Do we need all the bells and whistles of contemporary VTTs? No. Which is an odd thing for me to say on the week after Wizards announced that very sweet-looking Unreal Engine VTT they've got coming in a few years, which looks pretty cool. But if I was going to go all in on terrain and minis, that would be a neat digital way to replicate that experience in a way that 2-dimensional virtual tabletops can't. But on the other hand, if you just want to go Theater of the Mind, maybe you don't need that stuff. What I feel like I still need in a virtual environment for running D&D is I feel like that's even more. I do need to show people diagrams and maps, and let's talk about where you're laid out in a space, because we can't do it. I can't point like you're here, you're here, you're here, pointing at spaces next to me in the room I'm actually physically standing in, and they can be like, yeah, that's okay. Because I don't have that kind of ability to use the space around me, I feel like I do need some more likely I need occasionally at least diagrams, maps, and images through a virtual tabletop. So, and then once you start using the virtual tabletop, you're like, well, why don't we just use the whole thing, including the built-in character sheets and the automatic die rollers and things like that. You don't have to. So I'm going to have to contemplate ways I might still be able to use Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds to have a lot of the things that are great about having those digital tools and those virtual tools, but also move a few more steps in the direction of Theater of the Mind. So, man, if anybody has any experience doing that or has some suggestions, I'd love to hear them. But I really felt it was kind of relaxing to just walk in with a couple of books and my dice and a notepad and run a game of D&D for 2 hours, and then that's all I had to clean up to go home without having to worry about all those other things with miniatures and terrain. So that for live games, I think I'm probably going to do Theater of the Mind. If I ever go back to using miniatures, I probably am going to do something like Ultimate Dungeon Terrain. I've made some of it, but I think I would refine it even further. And if you don't know, Google Ultimate Dungeon Terrain or Dan Masters. Look at some of his videos. It's really cool the way he creates simple terrain where it's not fully. It's not like Dungeon, Dwarven Forge, where you recreate the entire dungeon in 3 dimensions. I mean, he does it for set piece battles and big scenes, not for hallway exploration or anything like that. That he reverts back to theater of the mind. And then he uses this minimalistic approach to using terrain and minis, which is much more like a theater in the round kind of approach to setting up a scene where people may need to know something about spacing and relative position. So that's probably what I would go back to in live play, is just something like that. And even with miniatures, I love my miniatures. They're fun to paint. And if players want a miniature to represent their character, that's cool. But I might even be tempted to go back to cardboard or paper minis to punch out minis to represent monsters and stuff. Unless it's a big monster, the big cool monsters that you only encounter one of, like dragons. That might be, that's a little different. But for skeletons and zombies and goblins and bandits and things like that, simpler is better. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about that. So that's the episode. Thank you for listening. I want to thank Jason and Anthony again for their calls. Be sure and check out the Nerds RPG Variety Cast and the Casting Shadows podcast for their content. And I appreciate everybody else out there. Hope you're doing well, wherever you're at, wherever you're listening from. Take care of yourself. I'll be back later. Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art I use for the episodes is by Dave Bone. Be sure and check out his website, ironseer.com, for a lot of other great gaming-related content. You can always leave me a voice message through the Anchor app or at the Anchor website, or you can email me at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Once again, I appreciate you listening. Thanks so much.